Hello and welcome everybody. This is Jack Gonzalez with Beat 'em Up Wrestling, and I have Michael Kingston, the guy behind Headlock.
How you doing?
All right, so
Hey.
we're going to start off this interview with the question that I always ask: is what about wrestling made you love it?
So when I was a kid, I remember I was like 8 years old, I want to say, and I'm not obviously a young dude. You can tell by the gray in my gray in my beard, but I was watching the first. I was flipping channels, and the first Saturday Night's Main Event came on, and it was Sheik, Volkov, and George the Animal Steel against Mike Rotunda, Barry Windham, and Ricky Steamboat. And I had never seen anything in my life like George the Animal Steel. That dude was going nuts. He's chewing the turnbuckles, and you know he's you know he's got a big roll of fat on the back of his neck, and he's got hair all over his body. I'm like, oh my god, I've never seen anything like this. I mean, unfortunately, it turned out to be a window into my future, is how I was going to develop as a man. But when you're younger, I'm like, I'd never seen anything like it, and I watched it, and I couldn't take my eyes off it. And then the next morning, and like Wrestling Challenge was on, or maybe it was All American Wrestling was on USA next morning, and I watched that, and I've watched it to this degree or another for the rest, for my entire life. Sometimes it's just, sometimes I watch WWE, and then eventually I discover the Indies, and just you know wrestling overseas, and now I consider myself to the art form. A lot of people are just. I always say a lot of people aren't wrestling fans; they're just WWE fans. Like the entire WWE could quit tomorrow and go work at Impact or whatever, and people wouldn't go with it. They just watch whatever WWE is because that's their WWE fans, and that's fine. I mean, that's good brand strength if you can get it. But like, I love wrestling. Like, I watched two of them in their first match, and I love it. So it's kind of how it all began. Just a hairy man with a green tongue.
Yeah, it's crazy how and whenever I ask that question, they always bring up like a wrestling match, and that's how we're always introduced to it. We see something in the ring that we're like, this is real. We could look at this, and then there's two dudes, or some cases like women, and like they're doing things that as a kid we would play around and imagine ourselves as superheroes, and here they are acting it out as adults. So I think that kind of drives us
Yeah,
into it.
definitely the closest thing. Yeah, definitely the closest thing you'll get to real life superheroes for sure.
So what made you want to merge comic books and wrestling?
So I love comics growing up too. X-Men was my jam as a kid. I think you just, on some level, the characters are so pervasive and popular. Like, I had an old maid game that had just Marvel heroes on it, and like, you didn't want to get stuck with Doctor Doom was the old maid. And like, so I like, in their cartoons, those old 60s Marvel cartoons they would run. So like, on some level you're familiar with all the characters. And I just remember seeing a comic on a spinner rack of Captain America and Spider-Man fighting, and as a kid, I'm like, whoa, these guys are good guys. Why are they fighting? And that was it. I made my mom buy me that book, and then I would buy them at the grocery store, and then eventually, my mom took me to my first comic book store, and it was it. I was gone.
Yeah.
So one thing was, no one ever made good wrestling comics. Like, I would buy all the wrestling comics, and I just always thought they were super cheesy. They weren't, as Undertaker fighting demons, or whatever, Kevin Nash's Mad Max, and the weird WWE licensed comics. Like, and I always felt like wrestling was had such an interesting culture behind it that people didn't know. So, I wrote up a pitch for Headlocked, and I took it to every comic book publisher I could find, and I was shut down by every comic book publisher I could find. I mean, like, a dude from a very large publisher straight laughed in my face. Another guy from a large publisher, I got the 3 words out of my mouth, and the third word was wrestling, and he said, nope, not interested. They didn't want to hear it. You know what I mean? Like, it was like 3-dimensional, 2-dimensional guys in tights fighting, the forces of good versus evil. Super nerdy. You go 3 dimensions, that's a bridge too far, apparently. So,
Yeah.
So, at some point it became obvious that nobody was going to make the comic book I wanted to read. And so I created Headlocked. And I, I did it myself. I worked 2, 3 jobs just to get myself, financially where I needed to be to pay for artists, pay for printers, pay for convention tables, and I just started doing it. I started selling it on my backpack at wrestling shows, until I built up enough of a fan base to buy convention tables, and then comics would find my stuff, and I made friends with Hurricane and Rob Van Dam and Christopher Daniels, and they all liked what I was doing. And because I asked stupid questions, I got them to contribute. We co-created stories for the books. I was like, hey, you like comics? Let's make a story together. And they're like, okay. And, and and it's sort of continued along that path. It's just been, I mean, I work a full-time job still. I mean, to be able to do what I do, because I want to pay all my artists and pay my printers and everything. And I don't use comic book stores because I don't necessarily know if comic book stores are the right place for what I do. So I just try to go out and find my audience the best I can. And, we've been able to do it for 10 years. So I consider myself very fortunate. And I don't think I would have done it any other way.
Okay. Yeah, that's I think what because I think Jerry the King had one of your comics when I went
He
to,
does the covers to the books.
yeah, when I went to meet him at Wizard World Chicago a couple of years ago, and that's how I was introduced to Headlock. And I was like, wait, what? And then I started looking for your comics. You've been doing Kickstarters. You're running a Kickstarter right now for the latest one, and yeah, sometimes some of your comics come through Pro Wrestling Tea Crates too. Like, and the stories are really interesting because like you team up with wrestlers and you get an insight that you wouldn't get any other way. Like, so that's why I enjoyed your comic.
And it's so much fun to be able to, I mean, honestly, wrestlers are just natural storytellers. Most of them understand that. Some of them, I think they even understand you know, how it is what they do is storytelling. But you know what I mean? Like it's super fun to collaborate with guys. I mean, I did a story with Ric Flair, and we sat down at a bar and we just hashed it out over drinks. And um, since it's just fun to collaborate and kick ideas back and forth. I mean, on some level, probably there's part of me that always wanted to be a wrestler. So this is my way of, sitting down and putting together a match with the guys, I guess. This is our, so what do you want to do, kid?
So you collaborated with a lot of big name wrestlers. Have you ever been starstruck with one of them? Like, has somebody like given you that starstruck persona when you met them?
I think at the beginning I was starstruck by everybody. And honestly, at this point in my life, I know almost everybody in the business just because I've been around it for so long. And most of the guys that are up on top now were, on the indies when I was, out doing my thing on the indies. So everybody kind of knows me. And I think the trick, honestly, is to approach them. You know what I mean? If you approach them as a fan, they're going to treat you like a fan. And that's not the relationship I want to have with these guys. So I approach them, as an equal. And it's kind of neat. Like if I'm at a comic book convention and we're in the green room and I'm there as a guest, I think they know, like, I've done something of note and I'm not some, not some geek off the street, as it were. So, you know what I mean? I think that helps give me a level of credibility with the guys. And obviously having worked with Jerry on everything, like, that helps out a lot too. So, I'd say these days I don't get starstruck as much. It's just, it's fun though. I mean, there's, like I see Ric Flair at shows a lot, and we've had drinks before and whatnot. And there's part of me that, he'll call me Wild Man occasionally, and that tickles me to no end. Like it's so stupid, but you know what I mean? Like it's just funny, So
Yeah, that's awesome though that you've been able to demonstrate, that you're not just coming at it as a fan, but you're here to tell stories and you're here to help them tell their stories too. So yeah, it's
that's all. Like imagine in a million years that it would have turned into what it's turned into. So, I mean, that was just beyond my scope of like thinking. I'd be like, oh yeah, I'm gonna have a New York Comic Con booth with like Sting and Trish Stratus and Christian and Jerry Lawler and whatever. Like, I mean, if you told me that, 10 years ago, I'd lose my mind. So, but it's been good. And I mean, honestly, it's been a tough week in wrestling for a lot of things. But I mean, overall, I got to tell you, like, most of the guys I meet in the business are just so sweet, and they're good people, and everybody's been so good to me. I mean, I'm in a situation where people could take advantage of me, people could do all kinds of stuff. I've probably had I've had maybe 2 bad experiences in 10 years with talent. Um, and that's it, really. So, I mean, for the most part, everybody kind of looks after me and makes sure that I'm taken care of, and I do my best to look after them and make sure that they get, and we all try to help each other, and that's how I've tried to do my bit. The rising tide raises all boats and all that stuff. So.
Yeah, no, I think that's awesome to have a mutual respect and take care of each other, like and give some positivity back to the industry. Like you said, this week's been kind of crazy, but we can all do a part to wean out the bad and just bring some positivity, because we could all tell stories of how wrestling has taken us out of some of the darkest spots in our lives too. Like, it's been an out, and now we just gotta take care of it and make sure that the good people are taken care of. So I don't know if you feel comfortable sharing this, but what's been the best wrestler you've collaborated with, like the experience? Like, I don't know if you want to make people feel bad if you say the wrong person.
I don't know. One of my favorites. I don't know if I necessarily could say the favorite, but one of my favorites was with Hurricane. When I was coming up, he was one of my favorite wrestlers because obviously he combined wrestling and comics.
Mm-hmm.
And now he's one of my best friends, and it's so super cool to think, like, so the story that we did for Headlocked is called Undefeated, and we collaborated while he was in a waiting room waiting on the results of an MRI on his neck, and he didn't know if his career was going to be over or not. And when you read the story that we put together, like, it comes from a very powerful place. And we were able to, I mean, like, honestly, I think I wrote the entire script in like 10 minutes. It was probably one of the easiest collaborations I've ever done. But it was, I mean, like, that story just kind of flowed out of us. Like, that was the story that needed to be told, and it got its way onto the page. And I love how it came out. He loves how it came out. And it's one of my favorites. So, everything's a little different. All the stories are a little different. They're in all different kinds of genres. I did a story with Gangrel about a guy who trains Bigfoot to wrestle, and it's silly, you know what I mean? But it's super fun. And, sitting down with him and just pitching out the weirdest ideas. We're eventually going to make that into something longer.
Oh, okay.
Like more of a long form series. But you know what I mean? Like, it's just super, super fun. And Dave is one of the coolest dudes. So, that stuff's fun. You know what I mean? Like, I've been really, really lucky.
Yeah, I had the pleasure of actually meeting the Hurricane at New York Comic Con. He was just walking by, and like super down to earth, like really approachable. Never came off like, some
He's
people.
probably at my booth.
It could have been. Yeah, he was probably just walking away from your booth at that time, because I was just walking, and he came up, and I was like, hey, I don't mean to bother you. Are you the Hurricane? And he was like, yeah. I'm like, and then he was really, really nice though. So it's cool.
Yeah, we had a stretch, I think, where he was a guest for me in New York, maybe like 2-3 years in a row.
Yeah, that was it then.
And that's one of the other things that I like about what we've been able to do is, when I first started going to conventions, I mean, wrestling wasn't represented anywhere. Like, maybe you might see Virgil somewhere set up, or Greg Valentine, or, whatever, in like a autograph table, but they're not, and no disrespect for those guys. I mean, get their money, but those guys aren't there because they love comics or whatever. They're there to make a buck, and it feels that way. You know what I mean? Like, so there was never anything that really celebrated wrestling. So one of the things I always wanted to make sure that I did at Headlocked is, when we have a booth somewhere, we do. Or I think Comic Cons are like the church in Highlander, where everybody sort of, can come together under one roof, and we're all just a bunch of dorks, and we all got our fandoms, and you might like anime, and you might like Pokemon, and I like wrestling and whatever, but there should be a place for all of it. And no one really ever made a place for wrestling. I don't think WWE ever saw the value in doing Comic Cons, beyond maybe sending their talent there, for money. And I've been fighting with everybody for years, every wrestling company that you can think of, about getting them to Comic Cons and stuff. But we have the only wrestling booth at San Diego Comic Con. We have the only wrestling booth at New York Comic Con. The only wrestling booth at Emerald City Comic Con. So a lot of the big shows don't bring in guests, and I have the only booth. So I try to make sure that we have cool guests, and we create that space for people to let the old freak flag fly. And I feel really proud of that. I feel really because I remember the first time I went to a Comic Con, I felt kind of like we weren't represented. And I mean, we were the first wrestling thing at probably 20 Comic Cons. There were Comic Cons that just straight up wouldn't allow wrestling. I mean, to this day I still get turned, like 2019 I got turned down by a show that didn't want wrestling. And I was able to be like, well, listen, I got a wrestling comic book, and people be like, oh, you can come. I'm like, well, I want to bring Jerry Lawler. And they'll be like, well, we don't want wrestlers. I'm like, well, Jerry's an artist. And they're like, okay, well, you can bring him as an artist. And they would advertise him as an artist, and then we'd show up and we'd blow the doors off the place. And then, they'd book wrestling after that. So I'd like to think that we did a lot to sort of raise the profile of wrestling throughout Comic Cons everywhere.
Yeah. No, that's weird that they would have the stigma with wrestling still. Like,
it's just people are in their bubble, you know what I mean? Like I did a show where somebody tried to bring Piper as a guest, and the guy only knew Piper as They Live. As the guy from They Live. He had no idea that Roddy Piper had done anything in professional wrestling. So, people get in their bubble, and for a long time, comics was just for superheroes. And it's expanding, and that's partially what I wanted to do with Headlocked. Headlocked is a drama, the main Headlock story. So it's different than, it's not a superhero book. There's no fantasy elements. It's just, a kid working his way through the wrestling business. So, I was trying to push the envelope of everything, I guess.
No, that I do like that story though, because you're showing the struggle and the work that goes behind. Most of the time, people that are exposed to wrestling, they see wrestling, the end product, whatever is presented on TV, and they don't know how long these people had to go through, hours of training, hours, sometimes injuries that they felt that could have ended their career, and like you bring all that, and fans get a way to realize that, before there was The Rock and Cena up at the top, they went through some of the struggles too.
Right, it was the prototype in Flex Kavana.
Is there a wrestler from the past that's no longer with us that you would have liked to have worked with?
So I actually had two stories. One of the things I had going on was the Ultimate Warrior was supposed to paint a cover for my book. Like he painted with like a palette knife and stuff, and was actually really talented at it. So I reached out to him, and then he called me up, and it was my birthday. Not that he knew that, but it was just funny, and he was telling me to stay positive on my project, and I felt like I was like a 9-year-old kid where, I was like, oh my God, the Ultimate Warrior is calling me on my birthday and telling me to stay positive. And obviously he died before that could happen. And then I had an agreement with Roddy Piper to work on a Headlock story, and we had met at San Diego Comic Con, and we were supposed to sit down at Stockton Con, which at the show we were both guests at, a month later, and he died 6 days before the show. So that was really super unfortunate. I mean, obviously just to lose those guys so young in life, but it kind of bummed me out too, obviously circumstance wise. I mean, somebody else I guess I always really wanted to be able a chance to work with would be Dusty Rhodes. I was bummed that I missed out on him. And then I always wanted to get Superstar Billy Graham to do a piece of art for my book, but by the time I had gotten to that point where I could approach him, he was just past the point where he wanted to paint things. So I
Mm.
kind of, you know, it's unfortunate, but you know, we do what we can with what we got. So we try
Yeah,
to make it work.
yeah. No, I mean, you've done so much already for the wrestling community and comics, and I as a comic book fan and a wrestling fan appreciate it. That's why I wanted to reach out to you when I saw your latest Kickstarter. After I backed it, I'm like, you know what? Let me reach out and get some insight into Headlock. So I really
Cool,
appreciate you
cool.
sharing some of your stories and talking about your passion and really for doing what you're doing. Is there something you would want the people to know about you that you want to share?
Uh, yeah, I not about me per se, but I always try to tell people, you know, like for a long time there was a high point of entry to get into businesses like this, and I know a lot of people want to do. You know, a lot of people approach me about making comics and stuff. It's never been easier. Like I do it myself out of this room that you're in right now. I mean, not myself per se. Obviously, I collaborate with artists and stuff, but technology links you together. Like you don't need to print 10,000 books anymore. Like if you want to make comics, you can make comics. All you got to do is do it. I mean, that's the, you know, it sounds so trite, but you know what I mean? Like, you're gonna suck at first. I mean, I look at some of the stuff I wrote at the beginning, and it's cringeworthy and whatever. But you got to go through that to get, you know, actually everything I look at. I mean, even the stuff I write now, I'm like, ugh, what's wrong with you, you hack? But I think that it's never been easier for people to sort of to do it, and you can have a full-time job. You can make comics on the side. You know, what I mean, if you love the art form and you want to do it, just do it. You know, people come to me and they'll be like, "Oh, I had an idea for a comic that was just like The Walking Dead." I'm like, well, if you had done it before Robert Kirkman, you'd be a millionaire. You
Yeah,
know, so it's just, I mean, and I like The Walking Dead, but it's not Shakespeare. You know what I mean? Like somebody could have written that, somebody else, and it could have been you. So that's why I always tell people, just you do your thing, man. Don't wait. Don't you just got to put one foot in front of the other. As we say in the first book of Headlocked, every journey begins with a single step. So, but people can do it, man. It's well within everybody's. I have a biochemistry degree. Like I taught myself to write. I taught myself comics. I don't use comic book stores. I don't, I barely get covered in the comic book media. I found I made a book. I found a way to get it to an audience, and whatever. Like I don't know. It's easier than you think. It's a ton of work, but it's easier than you think. So, if you want to do it, just do it. And if anybody can find me online, all the Headlock stuff is me. I'm always open to sharing my experiences or giving people advice, because I've made every mistake possible. So, by all means, stand on my shoulders.
no, it's great advice. I think a lot of people talk themselves out of it because they're afraid to fail, and it's like you have to take the bumps in order to finally succeed. And everybody has different measures of success. So no, really great advice, and I appreciate that. So where can they reach you?
All of our social media is Headlock Comic. It's one word. It's all me. I mean, I have a Facebook account under my name that I pretty much add everybody as long as you're not a weirdo. But I'm getting close to 5,000 friends, so I'll wait on that. But and then obviously we have a Kickstarter up at Kickstarter. It's Headlock Tales from the Road. Book's funded. It's going to happen. Right now, I just want to make it as big as possible. I mean, I got other people I can potentially do stories with, so if we can fatten this thing up, like, I mean, I'd love to add another story or two or some pinups or whatever to the book. So, let's keep doing it. And if you're not familiar with Headlocked, you can back for the first book. You can back for any of the books in the series, and the books that you get in Kickstarter are better than the books that I sell at shows. There's like 20 to 30 extra pages of content, so it rewards the people who help us when we need it the most.
Is there any way for people to get your Headlocked outside of Kickstarter, or is Kickstarter the only way
You can
outside of
get
shows?
you can get the standard version of the books. Like, so the standard version of my Headlock comics is 5 chapters of Headlock. And you can get that at conventions. You can get that on my website or whatever. The Kickstarter books are the ones that have the wrestler stories in them, because that's, otherwise we don't do enough on Kickstarter. We don't have Headlocked. So
Yeah.
I try to make sure to direct people into helping us, make it so we can make the books.
All right.
So if you back the Kickstarters, you get better stuff.
Well, there you go, guys. I think you have what 31 days left on your Kickstarter.
Yeah. I mean, we're hoping to get, maybe into the 20s. Maybe we'll kiss 30. I don't know. It's the hope. But I got other talent lined up. I ain't gonna name it. But once we get to 15,000, we're gonna start announcing some stretch goals. I got some cool stuff lined up, and so hopefully it's something people want to read.
Okay. Yeah, I'm gonna link your Kickstarter. They have till July 27th. So don't waste any time. Go out there and support it. Thank you once again,
Yes.
Michael Kingston, and thank you for doing what you're doing and uniting comics and wrestling.
Thanks so much. All right.